Was I ever enough for them? That question burned through me like wildfire on that stifling Georgia afternoon when I was 8, the sky blazing a false, fiery orange-red, as if it knew something I didn't. I sat in the back seat, my small hands clutching a worn teddy bear, its fur matted from years of desperate hugs. My backpack, stuffed with a few clothes and a half-eaten granola bar, rested heavy on my knees. My mother, Diana, drove, her eyes fixed on the road, lips pressed thin. My father, Robert, sat beside her, silent, staring out the window like he was memorizing the horizon. No one told me where we were going, but I knew this road. It wound to Grandma June's house in Savannah. I wasn't afraid. Grandma's hugs carried the scent of cinnamon and fresh pie, her voice a soft anchor in my unsteady world. But today, the air felt wrong, thick with something unspoken. The car crunched to a stop in her driveway, engine still humming, a low growl that wouldn't let go. My mother turned, her face pale, eyes heavy with something I couldn't name. "You'll stay with Grandma for a little while, Ivy," she said, her voice low, each word swallowed like it hurt to speak. "We just need to sort some things out." I didn't understand, not really, but her gaze slid away, avoiding mine. My father's hands stayed glued to the armrest, knuckles white, offering no glance, no goodbye. It was like I was luggage dropped at a stranger's motel. I stepped out, not noticing when the teddy bear slipped to the gravel. Grandma June stood at the door, her gentle smile there but strained, her eyes red-rimmed behind her glasses. She pulled me into her thin arms, her cardigan soft against my cheek, but the sound of tires screeching backward drowned her warmth. "Mom, wait!" I screamed, breaking free, my sneakers pounding the driveway as I chased the silver-gray SUV. My small legs burned, my voice cracked, praying for a window to roll down, a head to turn. But the car turned onto the main road, leaving only dust swirling in its wake, a cloud where love should have been. I froze at the driveway's end, chest heaving, staring at the empty street. Grandma called my name, her voice soft but distant, like it couldn't reach the whole opening inside me. I didn't turn, just kept my eyes on the road where the people I called Mom and Dad vanished, like characters in a story I was never meant to believe. That night, Grandma made my favorite mac and cheese, the plate set with care. A napkin folded into a triangle, a glass of milk on the right. I stared at it, unable to lift the fork. She sat across, taking a few bites before quietly rising. No scolding, no pressure. Later, she pulled a chair beside my bed in her small, weathered house, brushing my hair gently, singing a lullaby that felt like a fading breeze. I turned my face into the pillow, trying to silence my sobs, but they came anyway. Small, quiet, unstoppable. Not because I was hungry or scared, but because of that crushing question. Why wasn't I enough for them to stay? The next morning, I dragged a chair to the living room window, my eyes scanning every passing car, heart clenching at each engine's hum. I thought they'd come back, that this was a mistake. Days blurred into weeks, then months. No calls, no letters, not even a postcard to say they were alive. Only Grandma June stayed, her presence steady as the old oak outside her porch. She was a high school principal, her stern gaze making students lower their eyes in the halls. But at home, she kicked off her heels, her shoulders softening. She woke at 5 a.m. every day, brewing coffee, reading financial news I didn't understand. Years later, I'd learned she managed a serious investment portfolio, her simple life, driving a 1998 Toyota Corolla, wearing hand-knit cardigans, hiding a fortune no one in Savannah suspected. She never bragged, but I saw her give a scholarship to a boy whose family lost everything, saw her carry books and meals to neighbors. She sat with me for hours, helping with math or explaining why stars burned. "Understanding the world isn't small, Ivy," she'd say, her voice firm yet kind. "It's how you make it better." Those words planted something in me, a seed of resilience I didn't yet know I'd need. I stopped chasing the road's end, but the question lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake, hinting at battles yet to come. As the months stretched on without a whisper from my parents, Grandma June became my entire world. Her small white house in Savannah, a sanctuary where silence slowly turned into strength. She never let me wallow in that initial sorrow, though she didn't dismiss it either. Instead, she wove routines into our days like threads in one of her hand-knit cardigans, steady and warm. Every morning, she'd rise at dawn, the scent of brewing coffee mingling with the crisp financial pages she pored over at the kitchen table. I'd shuffle in, still rubbing sleep from my eyes, and she'd slide a plate of eggs, toast, and fruit toward me. No sugary cereals, always something nutritious to start the day right. "A strong mind needs a strong body, Ivy," she'd say, her voice carrying that principle's authority softened by a grandmother's care. I nodded, even when I didn't feel strong, picking at my food, while she glanced at stock reports I couldn't yet comprehend. She lived simply, her old Toyota Corolla parked outside, reliable but unremarkable, and her wardrobe full of practical clothes that hid the savvy investor beneath. I didn't know then about her portfolio, the one that grew quietly over decades, turning modest savings into something substantial. She never mentioned it, but I saw hints in her quiet generosity. The way she'd slip an envelope to a neighbor facing hard times, or fund a school trip for a kid who couldn't afford it. School became our battleground against the emptiness left by my parents. Grandma drove me there each day in that Corolla, the radio tuned to classical music that she said sharpened the mind. She'd ask about my classes, not just the grades, but what puzzled me, what sparked curiosity. When I came home with questions like, how do light bulbs work, or why does the sky turn blue at dusk, she didn't brush them off like other adults might. Instead, she'd clear the dinner table after our simple meals, often soups or casseroles made from scratch, and pull out books from her overflowing shelves. We'd head to the library on weekends, her guiding me through the stacks, showing me how to research, how to chase answers until they surrendered. She printed kid-friendly articles on science, history, whatever caught my fancy, and we'd discuss them over tea in the evenings. The more you understand the world, the more you're responsible for making it better, she'd remind me, her eyes serious behind her glasses. It wasn't pressure. It was invitation, pulling me from the window where I'd once waded into a space where I could build something of my own. And every time doubt crept in, that hollow whisper asking if my parents would ever return, she'd place a hand on my shoulder. Some adults aren't ready to be parents, Ivy. But that was never your fault. Her words didn't erase the ache, but they chipped at it, teaching me that love wasn't fragile, it was chosen, day by day. I learned resilience not by forgetting the driveway moment, but by layering new memories over it. Grandma's house, with its creaky floors and lavender-scented linens, became a classroom in disguise. She helped with every assignment, no matter how trivial, sitting beside me for hours as I struggled through fourth-grade physics problems on speed and distance. Her patience was endless. She'd explain concepts with everyday examples, like timing how long it took her Corolla to reach the end of the block. "No one is born knowing everything," she'd say when I brought home a low grade, never scolding, just guiding us to figure out the mistake and fix it. It was in those moments I glimpsed her own strength, the principal who commanded respect at work but came home to nurture a broken child. I saw her visit homes with boxes of books and hot meals for families in need, her acts of kindness quiet, unassuming. Once she gave a scholarship to a student whose family went bankrupt, covering tuition without fanfare. "We help because we can," she told me when I asked why. It planted a seed. That wealth, whatever form it took, was for lifting others, not hoarding. Though I didn't know the extent of her investments then, her lifestyle whispered of discipline. Simple meals, mended clothes, a focus on what mattered. As years passed, I grew in that environment, surrounded by books and evening lessons that turned the dinner table into a forum for ideas. Grandma never pushed for top grades, but she wouldn't let me quit either. When frustration mounted, she'd brew chamomile tea and sit with me, breaking problems into manageable pieces. Her influence seeped into everything. My handwriting improved from her neat script, my curiosity bloomed from her endless questions. I stopped feeling hollow inside, filling the space with knowledge and the quiet assurance that I was enough for her. But even as I adapted, hints of future complications lingered. The way she'd sometimes stare at old photos of my parents, her expression guarded, as if protecting me from truths yet untold. Those evenings, under the soft glow of her reading lamp, built me layer by layer, preparing me for challenges I couldn't foresee, turning abandonment's wound into a foundation of unyielding growth. By the time I turned 13, the routines Grandma June had built into our lives had woven a safety net around me, one that caught the lingering doubts about my parents and turned them into fuel for something greater. School wasn't just a place to pass time anymore. It became an arena where I could prove to myself that I was more than the girl left behind. That year, my middle school announced a state-level science fair, and something inside me sparked. I signed up without hesitation, choosing a project on the impact of light pollution on human circadian rhythms. It was ambitious for a kid who'd never ventured beyond Georgia's borders, but Grandma's lessons had taught me to reach for the stars, literally. The topic fascinated me, born from late-night talks under her porch light, where we'd discuss how city glows disrupted sleep patterns and health. I dove in headfirst, sketching diagrams on scrap paper during lunch breaks, researching articles she helped me find at the library. But it wasn't smooth. I messed up the initial experiments 3 times, miscalculating data on sleep cycles, and breaking a makeshift model of a night sky simulator the night before a practice run. Frustration boiled over. I slammed my notebook shut, tears stinging as I muttered I should quit. Grandma found me at the kitchen table, head in hands, and didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, she brewed hot cocoa, sat beside me, and said, "We'll rebuild it better. Quitting only leaves questions unanswered." She stayed up past midnight with me that night, her hands steady as we glued new pieces together, her voice calm, explaining variables I'd overlooked. She even called an old friend, a retired doctor from Charleston, who talked me through the biology of melatonin and how artificial lights threw it off balance. "This isn't just a project, Ivy," she said as we worked under the dim lamp. "It's you showing the world and yourself what you're capable of." Her belief was a quiet force, not loud encouragement, but consistent presence, like the way she'd check my progress each evening after dinner. We practiced my presentation in the living room, her sitting on the couch with a notepad, timing me, noting where I stumbled on words like photoreceptors or suprachiasmatic nucleus. She never laughed at my fumbles. Instead, she'd suggest simpler explanations, drawing from her principal days where she broke down complex ideas for high schoolers. Those sessions built my confidence, layer by layer, turning nerves into knowledge. As the fair approached, I felt a shift, not just in the project, but in me. The window vigils from years ago faded. I was too busy measuring lux levels from street lamps outside our house, Grandma holding the flashlight while I jotted notes in the cool evening air. The State Convention Center in Atlanta buzzed with energy on the day of the fair. Hundreds of kids milling about with posters and models, the air thick with the scent of dry erase markers and nervous sweat. My booth was simple. A trifold board with graphs on light exposure's effects, a small diorama showing urban versus rural skies, and handouts Grandma had helped laminate. When judges approached, my hands trembled, but I explained the hypothesis clearly: how excessive artificial light disrupted natural sleep-wake cycles, leading to health issues like insomnia or weakened immunity. They nodded, asking probing questions about data sources, and I answered from the research we'd compiled, citing studies on shift workers and wildlife. But the real test came during the oral presentation on the main stage. The lights blinded me as I stepped up, microphone cold in my grip, my body shaking so hard I could barely find my voice. The audience blurred into shadows, whispers echoing in the vast hall. Then, in the third row, I spotted her, Grandma June, sitting tall, hands folded in her lap, her smile unwavering, like a beacon cutting through fog. That pride in her eyes steadied me. I took a deep breath, began speaking about stars hidden by city haze and bodies thrown out of rhythm, my words gaining strength with each slide. When they announced the winners, my name echoed, first place for the middle school division. The plaque heavy in my hands as applause rippled through the room. It wasn't just victory, it was validation, a tangible proof that I could create something worthwhile without waiting for anyone to return. Grandma threw a modest party in our backyard that night. No balloons or fanfare, just her homemade lasagna bubbling in the pan, cold lemonade in pitchers, and a handful of my favorite teachers gathered around the picnic table. As I stepped outside, the first place medal around my neck catching the twilight, she stood and hugged me tightly, her cinnamon scent enveloping me. "You're not just smart, Ivy. You're resilient. And from now on, you don't have to wait for anyone to come back. Your family is right here." I couldn't speak, just held her longer, feeling the weight of abandonment lift a little more. That plaque hung above my desk, a daily reminder, and in that moment, I knew I'd never drag a chair to the window again. Grandma had shown me a path forward, one built on curiosity and grit, but even then, I sensed shadows of unresolved pasts lingering, waiting to resurface when I least expected. The summer I turned 18 felt like a milestone, a quiet promise that I'd outgrown the shadow of that long-ago driveway. Grandma June planned my birthday with her usual care, choosing a small restaurant in downtown Charleston, elegant enough for celebration, quiet enough for conversation, as she put it. The evening unfolded under soft lights, a white tablecloth spread across the table, a lavender bouquet at its center mirroring her love for simple beauty. I sat surrounded by close friends, a few former teachers, and kind neighbors who'd watched me grow. Grandma, in a graceful gray dress, raised her glass, her voice steady but warm. 8 years ago, you walked into my home with a backpack and 1,000 questions in your eyes. Today, you sit here, independent, brave, and shining. I couldn't be prouder. The room clapped, their smiles wrapping me in warmth, but my nose stung with tears I fought to hide. I tried to stay composed, cutting into the vanilla cake she'd ordered, its frosting flecked with edible flowers. After dinner, she called me aside, her hands trembling slightly as she handed me a faded blue velvet box. "Your 18th birthday gift," she said softly. "Not to wear, to remember." Inside was a delicate white gold chain with a tiny, intricate key pendant, its edges sharp against my fingertips. "What does it open?" I asked, half expecting a playful riddle. She just smiled, her eyes holding secrets, and rested her hand on mine. "One day you'll understand." I didn't press, slipping the chain around my neck, feeling its weight settle like a promise of things yet to unfold. Life felt full then, brimming with possibility. I was applying to colleges, dreaming of studying environmental science, inspired by those late-night talks with Grandma about the world's fragile systems. She'd sit with me, reviewing applications, suggesting edits with her principal's precision, always encouraging me to aim high, but stay grounded. "You've got the mind for it, Ivy," she'd say, her voice a quiet push toward ambition. But 3 months later, on a crisp Tuesday afternoon, my world shattered again. I was at school, handing in a final presentation for my senior year biology class, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I thought it was my friend Sarah asking to grab food, but the voice on the other end was sharp, urgent, a nurse from Savannah General Hospital. "Ivy, your grandmother June has been brought to the emergency room. Her heart stopped on the way here." My stomach dropped, the hallway blurring as I ran to my locker, grabbed my bag, and sprinted to the parking lot. The drive to the hospital was a haze, my hands shaking on the wheel of Grandma's old Corolla, the same one she'd driven me to school in for years. I kept whispering, "Please, please be okay," as if words could hold her here. When I arrived, the sterile hospital air hit me like a wall, the beeping monitors and hushed voices too loud in my ears. A doctor met me in the hallway, his face kind but heavy. "I'm so sorry, Ivy. We did everything we could." They led me to her room, where a white sheet draped her still form, her hands folded peacefully, as if she'd simply decided to rest. I stood there, frozen, the key pendant cold against my chest. The world went dark, not just from grief, but from the sudden weight of being alone again. I couldn't cry. Not yet. I just stared, trying to memorize her face, the lines etched by years of discipline and love. The nurse handed me her cardigan, the sky blue one I'd helped wash last winter, and I clutched it, breathing in the faint scent of lavender and home. How could someone so constant, so unshakable, be gone in an instant? The days that followed were a blur of arrangements and condolence calls. I moved through them mechanically, answering questions about funeral plans, nodding at neighbors' sympathies. Grandma's house felt too quiet without her morning coffee routine or the clink of her spoon against a teacup. I slept in her guest room, unable to face my own bed, the key pendant never leaving my neck. I kept expecting her to walk through the door, to tell me this was a mistake. But the silence screamed otherwise. At night, I'd sit by her old desk, running my fingers over her neatly organized files, wondering what the key unlocked. Not just a physical lock, but a truth I wasn't ready to face. I didn't know then that her death would crack open the past, bringing back the parents who'd abandoned me, their shadows looming larger than ever. The funeral was days away, and with it, a storm I couldn't yet see, one that would test everything Grandma had built in me, everything she'd left behind to protect me. The funeral was held that Saturday at the old church Grandma June had taken me to every holiday, its wooden pews worn smooth by generations of prayers and sorrows. Every seat filled with people whose lives she'd touched. Former students whispering stories of her guidance, colleagues nodding solemnly, neighbors clutching tissues as the organ played a soft hymn. I sat in the front row, my fingers clenched around the key pendant, its cool metal pressing into my palm like an anchor against the hollow ache in my chest. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh lilies from the arrangements flanking her casket, their white petals a stark contrast to the gray day outside. The pastor spoke of her legacy, her dedication as a principal, her quiet acts of charity, but his words blurred in my ears. I kept glancing at her photo on the program, her smile gentle and knowing, wondering how I'd navigate a world without her hand on my shoulder. Grief wrapped around me like a fog, thick and disorienting, making each breath feel labored. I didn't cry during the service. The tears stayed locked inside, a pressure building that I feared would break me if released. As the congregation filed out, sharing hugs and condolences, I lingered by the casket, tracing the edge with my fingertip, whispering a silent promise to make her proud. Then the church doors swung open, letting in a rush of outdoor air that pulled taut like a violin string, carrying with it the scent of rain on the horizon. I turned, my heart pounding as if it sensed trouble before my mind could. There they were, my parents, Robert and Diana, stepping into the sanctuary like they belonged, as if a decade hadn't erased them from my life. My mother's hair was still in that familiar style, now dyed a subtle auburn, a pricey coat draped over her shoulders. My father looked exhausted, his suit well pressed but his eyes shadowed, hands fidgeting at his sides. They hadn't aged much, but the years had etched lines of something harder, regret, or perhaps calculation. No texts, no calls in 10 years, not even a birthday card, and now they walked toward me with purposeful strides. My stomach twisted, I gripped the pew for support, the wood cool under my fingers. "My love," my mother started, her voice syrupy, reaching for my hand as if no time had passed. I pulled back instinctively, the key pendant swinging against my chest like a warning. "We've come to take you home," my father cut in, his tone firm, almost businesslike. "After all, you're only 18. Legally, we still have guardianship in some matters." I rose slowly, meeting their eyes without flinching, though inside, a storm raged. Confusion, anger, a flicker of that old child's hope quickly snuffed out. "No, I'm not going anywhere. This is my home." My mother sighed, her expression shifting to one of feigned patience. "Don't be stubborn, Ivy. You don't understand. There are things you don't know, and her estate." Her words trailed off as a tall man in a dark suit stepped forward from the side aisle, his brown leather briefcase in hand, expression cold but professional. "She's not going anywhere," he said clearly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "And actually, there are a few things you two need to be informed of." He introduced himself as Daniel Shaw, Grandma June's personal attorney, and motioned us to a small side room off the sanctuary, its walls lined with faded hymnals and a single wooden table. We followed, the door clicking shut behind us, sealing in the heavy silence. My parents exchanged glances, my mother's face paling slightly, my father's jaw tightening. Daniel opened his briefcase, pulling out a thick folder, his movements deliberate. According to the legal will drafted 3 years ago, Mrs. June Richardson leaves her entire estate, including 3 properties in Charleston, a stock portfolio valued at over $42 million, and full control of the Richardson Educational Trust, to her granddaughter, Ivy Richardson. The words hung in the air, a bombshell that sucked the breath from the room. I heard my mother gasp, a sharp intake like she'd been slapped, while my father stepped back, his eyes widening. Silence fell, thick and solid, as Daniel continued, unflinching. In addition, Mrs. June officially completed the guardianship transfer when Ivy was 14 years old. "The two of you are no longer her legal guardians under any circumstances." I tightened my grip on the key pendant, its shape suddenly feeling like proof. Grandma had foreseen this, prepared for it, trusted me to stand tall. My father clenched his jaw, staring at the papers as if willing them to change. "We never received anything. Someone must have hidden," Daniel interrupted calmly, sliding another set of documents toward them. These are the legal copies. You both signed the relinquishment of guardianship in 2014 and ignored every court notice during the proceedings. I personally filed the documents and signed off on every contact attempt. Everything has records, signatures, and court seals. If necessary, I can present them publicly. My mother turned to me then, her eyes meeting mine for the first time since they'd walked in, a mix of pleading and something sharper. Ivy, we're family. The past is over. Now you need guidance. The world out there is complicated. You can't manage alone. I pressed the chain against my neck, the key's cold metal grounding me in an odd calm. I've managed on my own for 10 years, not because of you. Because of Grandma June. She stepped closer, her tone turning too sweet, cloying. You don't understand. We can start fresh. We can run this estate together, build a future. A small laugh escaped me, not bitter, just the quiet realization of someone seeing through the veil. If Grandma hadn't left me anything, would you be here? Their silence answered, eyes confessing greed I hadn't fully grasped until now. I turned to Daniel. Do they have any legal rights left? He shook his head. None. Mrs. June handled it all. And under the will, the entire estate is yours, without conditions. My father exhaled sharply, leaning back as if defeated, while my mother stood rigid, fists clenched. She spat out, "You'll regret this. A kid like you knows nothing about running a whole empire." I didn't blink. I know that a child once abandoned survived, learned, rose, and now runs that empire. And you? You showed up only when you smelled money. Daniel stepped beside me, signaling the usher to escort them out. But I raised a hand. I had one last thing. Looking at my father, the man who'd gripped the steering wheel that day without a backward glance, I said, I don't hate you for leaving me. I hate that even now, you still don't see what truly matters. My mother's eyes widened, mouth opening to argue, but Daniel ended it. I'm afraid we must close this meeting. If you wish to contest, we'll see you in court. They walked out without looking back, and this time, I didn't wish they would. The air lightened, sunlight filtering through stained glass, casting colors on the floor. A strange lightness washed over me. I no longer had to prove anything to them, only live up to Grandma's trust. But as Daniel gathered his papers, he placed a thick ivory envelope on the table, her handwriting unmistakable. Ivy, open only when you're truly ready. The storm wasn't over. Deeper truths waited, ones that would reshape everything I thought I knew. I stood in that small church room, the echo of my parents' footsteps fading as the door clicked shut, leaving behind a silence that felt both heavy and freeing. The ivory envelope from Daniel rested in my hands, Grandma June's neat script spelling my name across its surface. A final tether to her voice. My fingers trembled. Not from fear, but from the weight of knowing she was no longer here to explain what lay inside. I sank into a chair, the wood creaking under me, and tore the seal, the papers rustle loud in the quiet. The first sheet held a single line. If you're reading this, everything has unfolded exactly as I expected. My breath caught, a mix of grief and awe at her foresight. I drew a deep breath, the air tinged with the faint scent of old hymnals, and began to read. My dearest Ivy, she wrote, if this letter is in your hands, your parents have likely returned, just as I feared and prepared for. Her words were steady, like her voice at our dinner table lessons, but they carried a truth I wasn't ready for. She revealed that when I was 8, Robert and Diana had tried to transfer her assets and shares in the Richardson Foundation into their names while she was away in Denver. They'd used stolen documents from her office safe, believing her a naive principal too old to notice. They were wrong. She'd caught them early, confronted them with a choice: leave Charleston forever or face public exposure. They chose money and their image, abandoning me without hesitation, no apology, as if I were a footnote in their scheme. My throat tightened, the page crumpling in my grip. I'd comforted myself for years, imagining they'd left due to poverty or desperation. Something forgivable. But this? I was worth less to them than a failed theft. I read on, tears blurring her words. I hid this truth not because you were weak, but because you deserved a childhood free from their greed and betrayal. You needed to believe you were loved. My chest ached, not just for the betrayal but for her sacrifice. She'd shielded me, carrying this alone to give me a chance to grow. They didn't leave because you weren't good enough, she wrote. They left because they weren't kind enough. I paused, pressing the key pendant against my neck, its sharp edges a reminder of her trust. You are a Richardson, and we women with this name don't topple easily. I didn't leave you this estate for revenge, but to build. She warned they'd return with sweet words or lies, but reminded me, a decade without them didn't break you. It shaped you. Use the key to open any door you choose. Freedom, kindness, power they never imagined. The letter ended with, true love comes from action, from choosing to stay. I chose you every day. With love, June. I folded the letter, setting it on my lap, and sat in silence, the church's stained glass casting fractured colors across the floor. The anger I'd expected didn't come. Instead, clarity settled in. I wasn't abandoned because I lacked worth. I was a threat to their greed, and that made me stronger. I wasn't the child staring down an empty road anymore, waiting for love to return in a rearview mirror. Grandma had built me into someone who could stand alone, not out of necessity but strength. I slipped the letter into my pocket, the key pendant warm against my skin, and stepped back into the sanctuary. Mourners lingered, their hushed voices a soft hum, but I felt detached, as if the letter had lifted a veil. Daniel waited by the door, his briefcase closed, his expression softer now. There's more, Ivy, he said quietly, but only when you're ready. I nodded, not asking what. He meant the video, another piece of her legacy, but this moment was for absorbing the truth. The days after the funeral were a haze of grief and quiet resolve. I moved through Grandma's house, touching her things, her coffee mug, her worn Bible, the lavender vase by her desk, each a reminder of her love. I wore the key pendant daily, its weight a silent vow to honor her. But my parents didn't vanish as I'd hoped. Phone calls came to Daniel's office, legal threats disguised as concern, claiming the will was invalid or that I, at 18, couldn't handle the estate. Each attempt was rebuffed, the guardianship papers ironclad, but their persistence gnawed at me. I'd lie awake at night, the letter's words replaying. They left because they weren't kind enough. It freed me from self-blame, but fueled a new fire to protect what she'd entrusted to me. I began visiting the Richardson Foundation, meeting board members who'd worked with her, their eyes kind but skeptical of my youth. I studied her files, learning the scope of her investments, properties, stocks, trust funding scholarships for kids like me. The key wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol of her belief that I could unlock a future she'd shaped. As I prepared for what lay ahead, I sensed their next move would come soon, a final challenge to test the strength she'd built in me, one I'd meet not as a child, but as her heir. 3 months after the funeral, I thought the dust had settled, but peace was an illusion when greed lingered in the shadows. I spent my days at the Richardson Foundation headquarters, a sleek high-rise in Charleston, where Grandma June had built her legacy brick by brick. The sign outside read, Richardson Foundation since 1971, a reminder of her vision for education and aid. I dove into the work, meeting with the legal team to understand trusts, sitting with accountants poring over financial statements, and reviewing the investment board's reports on her portfolio. It was overwhelming at first, numbers dancing on screens, risks to analyze, decisions that affected scholarships for hundreds of kids. But I approached it like her science lessons. Break it down, ask questions, learn step by step. I'd wake early, brew coffee in her old mug, and drive the Toyota Corolla to the office, its familiar hum grounding me. The key pendant stayed around my neck, a talisman against doubt. I expanded programs she'd started, like scholarships for rural students, feeling her presence in every file I touched. Yet my parents didn't fade away. Robert and Diana bombarded Daniel's office with complaints, hiring 2 firms to challenge the will. Their claims shifted like sand. First, Grandma's mental health was unstable, then the will was drafted under duress. Finally, that I lacked capacity at 18 and needed temporary guardianship. Each motion was denied, the court citing the airtight documents she'd prepared. I'd get updates from Daniel over phone calls, his voice steady. Another one dismissed, Ivy. She covered every angle. But their persistence wore on me, a constant drip eroding the calm I'd fought for. I thought failure would deter them. But on a Monday morning, as sunlight streamed through the boardroom windows during a strategy meeting, my phone buzzed. The front desk. Ivy, they're here. No appointment, and they're refusing to leave. My heart raced, but I excused myself, smoothing my blazer, Grandma's deep blue one from her first board meeting, and descended the marble steps to the lobby. The echo of my heels announced me before I spoke. There they stood, dressed like they were at a conference. My mother's coat impeccable, my father's tie knotted tight, but their eyes burned with frustration. "Ivy, we need to talk privately," my mother said first, her voice edged with demand. I kept my expression neutral, crossing my arms. "Every legal matter has been answered by counsel. If you continue disrupting headquarters, I'll have security escort you out." My father stepped forward, fury restrained but evident. "Her granddaughter has no right to run a foundation this size. This is a family estate, and we're the only legal relatives left." I gave a small smile, nodding to security, then added, "Proceed to conference room 4. We'll talk one last time." They followed, the tension thick as we entered the soundproof room, bright lights overhead casting no shadows to hide in. I took the head of the table, them across, no longer parents but adversaries in a battle of wills. I began, my voice steady though my pulse thrummed. "You left me 10 years ago, no explanation, not even a letter. And now you return, not for me, but because she left more than you could ignore." My mother flushed, leaning forward. "We already said it was a mistake. But we have rights. You can't make all the decisions alone." I pulled Grandma's handwritten letter from my file folder, placing it gently on the table and sliding it toward them. "If I need to present this to the full board, I will. In it, she states you conspired to seize her assets. When you failed, you left me like a burden." My father's face hardened, trying to interject, but no words formed. My mother stared at the letter like a verdict sealed against her. I met their eyes directly, stripping away softness. "Don't tell me I'll regret this. I've lived 10 years without you, and not once have I felt regret." My mother murmured, playing her last card, "But who will the media believe? They might see a story about an orphaned granddaughter stealing an unclear inheritance." I straightened, fingers brushing the blazer's collar. "Then tell the whole story. Tell them you abandoned your daughter at 8, that you tried to steal from her grandmother. That for a decade you never reached out, not a birthday, not a word, until you heard $42 million. I paused, adding slowly, "If you're going public, don't leave anything out." Silence blanketed the room, heavy as lead. My father stood first, grabbing his briefcase, avoiding my gaze. My mother followed, shoulders trembling faintly. They left without a word, the door closing with finality. I sank into the chair, late sunlight filtering through the glass, warming the framed photo of Grandma on the desk. I nodded subtly at it. The final move made and I hadn't lost. Daniel emailed soon after. "Ivy, it's time for the final video." The confrontation had ended their claims, but Grandma's true legacy waited, a mission to carry forward, turning my pain into something enduring. Daniel met me in Grandma June's office on the top floor of the Richardson Foundation, a space untouched since her passing, as if her presence still lingered in the polished oak desk and the vase of dried lavender by the window. The calendar on the wall was frozen at the month she died, its pages curling slightly, and the ticking of her old wall clock filled the silence. I sat in her chair, the leather worn from years of her steady hands, signing papers that changed lives. Daniel plugged a USB drive into the computer, his expression solemn but kind. "This is the last piece, Ivy," he said, stepping back to give me space. The monitor flickered to life, and there she was, Grandma June, in her sky-blue cardigan, her gray hair neatly pinned, her eyes as sharp and gentle as I remembered from our dinner table lessons. Her voice rang out, slow and steady, like she was teaching me one final truth. "If you're watching this, Ivy, then everything has unfolded just as I expected. And if that's the case, it's time for you to hear the most important part." She paused, looking straight into the camera, as if she could see me sitting there, gripping the key pendant, my heart tight with grief and anticipation. "I didn't just leave you money," she continued. "Numbers can't protect you. What I left you was a mission." The screen shifted to a montage, images that hit like a wave. Children in worn clothes standing outside rural schools, their faces bright with hope. Foster kids reading in a quiet library corner. Mobile health units parked in low-income neighborhoods, all funded by a hidden branch of her work. "I quietly created the Bright Roots Foundation," she said, "dedicated to helping abandoned children, those in foster care, and students no one believes in. I was once a child no one chose, until someone gave me a chance. I want you to do the same. Not because you're wealthy, but because you know what it feels like to be unchosen. My breath caught, tears welling, as I saw a young girl in the video, curled up with a book in a library, much like the one we'd visited together. June's voice softened. You're not just the heir, Ivy. You're the continuation. The screen faded to black, but something in me ignited, a purpose that felt like her hand on my shoulder again. I wasn't alone. The pain of abandonment, the silence of those years, became a bridge to others waiting for someone to believe in them. 2 months later, I stood in the main boardroom, the Richardson Foundation sign now engraved with a new line. In honor of June Richardson, a legacy of belief. I'd taken on the role of executive director for both the Richardson and Bright Roots Foundations, a decision that raised eyebrows among board members who saw only an 18-year-old girl stepping into a seasoned educator's shoes. I wore Grandma's wool blazer, its deep blue a quiet nod to her, and presented a 3-year plan to expand STEM scholarships for rural girls. My voice was clear, no appeal to emotion, just data and vision. Funding for laptops, mentors, and science camps to reach kids in forgotten corners of Georgia. When I finished, the room was quiet. But the board members' nods told me they saw her in me. Not just her strength, but her mission. I kept her office as it was, the ticking clock, the lavender vase, the desk where I now signed my own papers. I drove her 2001 Toyota Corolla, not for thrift, but as a symbol of roots, a reminder of where I came from. Each morning I stepped out of that car, badge reading executive director, and thought not of power, but of the children still waiting. Girls who needed a laptop to code, boys no one asked, "What do you want to be?" The work wasn't easy. Board meetings stretched late, budgets demanded precision, and every decision carried the weight of lives depending on it. But I thrived in it, fueled by the clarity June's letter and video had given me. I didn't use the wealth to prove my worth. I used it to create value, funding libraries and foster homes, science kits for rural schools, health clinics for kids who'd never seen a doctor. Every step felt like a conversation with her, her nod echoing in my choices. The key pendant stayed around my neck, not just a gift, but a promise I'd made, to build, to stay, to choose those who'd been left behind. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was making it matter, turning pain into purpose, for those who, like me, once stood alone at the end of a driveway. The air in Grandma June's office feels softer now, the ticking clock a gentle pulse as I sit at her desk, papers spread before me, each one a step toward a child's future. The work is relentless, but it carries a quiet joy, like the warmth of her cinnamon hugs or the way she'd smile when I solved a problem. I think of her letter, her video, her voice whispering that I'm the continuation, not of wealth but of belief, of choosing to stay when others walk away. The key pendant rests against my chest, no longer a mystery but a reminder. I've unlocked the door she left for me, one leading to classrooms filled with curious eyes, to libraries where forgotten kids find their spark. The pain of abandonment lingers, a faint scar, but it's woven into something stronger, a mission to lift others as she lifted me. Outside, the Savannah sunset paints the sky that same orange-red from a decade ago. But now it feels like a promise kept, not a betrayal. I close my eyes, imagining her nod, her voice soft as a breeze. You made it matter, Ivy. And in this moment, with the world quiet and the work waiting, I know I'll keep going, for her, for them, for the girl I once was, whispering back to the past that I am enough.